Well, thank you very much for attending this Twinkl Teach Meet. So our topic today is supporting learners to achieve the end of the Key Stage 2 expectations for swimming. So I'll just share my slides with you there. Just to begin with, these are a few thoughts that I myself have had in the past when I've taught swimming. My background is I was a primary school teacher for a few years, and I'm also a level 2 swim instructor with Swim England. And actually, when I left teaching in primary school, I ran my own swimming school for a couple of years. And prior to that, I was involved in teaching swimming as part of our PE department at the school. And sometimes it was quite nerve-wracking. So just to be honest about that, some of these thoughts I've had myself, such as I'm anxious about safety, or oh my goodness, none of the children in the group I've been given can swim at all. Where do I even begin? And some of these other thoughts I've put on are ones that I've heard from other teachers or TAs or practitioners that have been involved with teaching swimming. So I wonder if anybody here can identify with any of those. And I'm hoping by the end of this Teach Meet that we could perhaps address some of these common concerns that we tend to hear around teaching swimming. So just to begin, I'm going to have a little look at what the national curriculum says. So first, just to point out, in the national curriculum for PE, it's swimming and water safety. So those two things are brought together, which is, of course, extremely important. And interestingly, in the national curriculum, it says you must provide swimming instruction either in Key Stage 1 or Key Stage 2. So there isn't a set expectation that it's done throughout the key stages or in one particular key stage. But it might be interesting just to think about your experience in schools, whether in your situation you've been asked to teach Key Stage 1 or Key Stage 2, the differences that you found between teaching those different age groups, and where you think it's been more successful. So in the details on the curriculum, and it's not particularly detailed, as you can see here, but pupils should be taught to swim competently, confidently and proficiently over a distance of at least 25 metres, use a range of strokes effectively, and they've given you examples of some of the major strokes, and also perform safe self-rescue in different water-based situations. So at first glance, these are really quite generic statements about swimming, and there isn't a lot of detail there and not a lot of guidance of how we can get children to these points, or even what these points really mean. So I thought it'd be a good idea to have a little look at some of these and break them down a little bit. So first, I've got a few questions in here that might be useful to have a think about, which is, what does swimming proficiently over 25 meters even look like? What does that even mean to be a proficient swimmer? The curriculum also says we need to use a range of strokes effectively. Again, what does that effectively even mean? And that's something that I will go into shortly. And a couple that I've had a lot of questions about in my time is, how do we perform safe self-rescue? What is that, and how do we perform it? And what do they mean by different water-based situations? So these are some of the questions that I think are raised by these national curriculum objectives. So firstly, and most importantly, let's talk about safety when we teach swimming. So when you are, if your school has its own swimming pool, or whether you have a slot booked out in your local leisure centre, there should be a tailored risk assessment for that particular pool. This isn't something that you can just find online and download and that it will apply to every single pool that you work with. Every swimming pool has slightly different dimensions. Your risk assessment should be tailored to, of course, the pool depth, but also the pool length, the pool width, where the exits are, the changing rooms, how the children access the pool. So you might get pools with ladders or pools with steps. You might even get pools that have, very, very shallow ends that the children can just walk into. So there's all sorts of different shapes and sizes and considerations of risk. So it is extremely important that your risk assessment is tailored to your particular pool environment. And another one to think about, of course, is the changing facilities, whether there are any risks presented there. So if the children have to walk over a slippery poolside for quite a distance, for example, whether the children can get ready safely in there without supervision, all of these considerations. So it is extremely important. It is tailored and not generic risk assessment. If you are working with a leisure centre or a local pool, they really should have this all ready for you and prepared for you as a school. And it is extremely important that you have that risk assessment in your hand and you've been able to look over it and read over it before any swimming teaching takes place in that environment. So when you get your risk assessments, what there should be are what are called PSOPs, so pool safety operating procedures, and these tend to be split into two parts. So you'll have a normal operating plan, the NOP. So all that means is these are the risk assessments and operating procedures for when everything is normal, everybody is happy, we have no crisis whatsoever, and that might include things like the access to the pool. It might include the temperature that the water is kept at, the temperature that the change rooms are kept at. So everything that is everyday operations within the pool. A very important consideration for that one is extra staffing. So thinking about in your pool environment that you will be going into, are there lifeguards present? How many lifeguards? Are there other pool staff, such as first aiders, who could be useful? Do you need to have a pool manager present, depending on that particular size of pool and how many staff they need? So that is a really important consideration there for then how many staff you bring from your particular school. And then the second part that you should have in your pool safety operating procedures is the emergency action plan. So that is what you would do if anything happened to anybody within the pool and within your own care. So what the pool expectations are around emergencies, and of course that would be a very important one to look at there. So that could include things like where the first aid equipment is kept, what first aid equipment they have, and what they do in more serious scenarios. So that, of course, is very important. Other things you need to consider when you are either creating yourself or receiving a tailored risk assessment for your pool are the environment and the staffing needs. So whether your staff have particular needs themselves that need addressing. Poolsides can be extremely warm, for example. So whether the staff are dressed appropriately for being at a very warm poolside. You may be in a pool that has a lot of windows or possibly even an open air pool. So then sun glare on the water can be really quite problematic. So your staff may need to be provided with bring their own sunglasses, and also accessing needs, of course, might be different for all staff. A common temperature one that is definitely worth considering is the temperature of the changing rooms and whether the children are going to be comfortable enough in possibly very cold changing rooms. With regards to everything safety, here at Twinkl Swim, we have got a Twinkl Swim safety guidance document that covers the advice around the PSOP and what it should contain. And I popped a link in there for you if you want to have a look at that. So that might be a useful generic guidance for you before you start swimming. Okay, so just popping back now to the national curriculum. So one of the questions that came out of the wording of the national curriculum is, what does swimming proficiently over 25 metres looks like? And there isn't a hard and fast rule. There isn't a government approved definition of this. But from an experienced swimming teacher, I would say that swimming proficiently certainly links to tiredness in the children. Are they able to cover that distance in one go? Are they having to take lots of breaks? If they are having to take breaks, are they able to do that safely? That's very important if they're out of their depth, for example. And tiredness is very much linked to breathing. So when your children are completing that one length, that 25-metre distance, are they able to breathe rhythmically? So that would be, are they breathing out in the water and then breathing in when they raise their heads? Are they able to accomplish that? Or if not, have they got other techniques to be able to control their breathing? Because of course, as soon as they run out of breath, they're going to become extremely tired. Another aspect of swimming that I think is really important for proficiency is streamlining. So are the children in a really good body position in the water? Are they reducing drag wherever possible? So for example, if they're in the front crawl position, you would want them to have a lovely flat body. You wouldn't want their legs dropping below the surface and creating lots of drag. So having a look at body position and their own streamlining is really important for proficiency. And another one is confidence. I think that's extremely important for proficient swimming. Are they completing this 25-meter distance, but are they doing it in a panic? Or are they actually completing it with confidence, feeling good in themselves, feeling able to swim even further if they had to? And a question that I certainly ask myself all the time when I think about this requirement is, if this child, if the worst happened and they fell into water that was out of their depth and they 5 meters away from where they could climb out safely, would they be able to cover? And I think those three aspects of tiredness, streamline, to completing that distance with proficiency. So the next question that came up is, how do we use a range of strokes effectively? So I thought we'd just have a little look at that. So I put the 4 major strokes on here. We've got breaststroke, backstroke, front crawl, and butterfly. Of course, butterfly is one that is not commonly practiced among primary school children, but it might be one to look at if you've got your more proficient swimmers who have gone past the end of Key Stage 2 expectations and they're already able to complete a 25-meter distance in the other 3 strokes, in breaststroke, backstroke, and front crawl. You could start looking at the butterfly stroke. So when I think about teaching strokes and ensuring that children are able to perform effectively, I think a hugely important part of that is breaking it down. So let's teach one part of the stroke at a time. So staying with our example of front crawl there, you might want to focus on the legs first. So the children might support their arms with a flotation. And then you could work on getting the leg position, the leg kicking, that flutter kicking beneath the surface, lovely pointed toes, lovely straight legs, making sure that is in place first. And then perhaps working on bringing in the arm position, and then finally bringing in the breathing. So breaking down the strokes is a really effective way of helping the child become proficient in that movement, and is really essential. When you're teaching how to perform a stroke, again, going back to what we said in the previous slide, reducing drag is going to be a huge part of being able to perform that stroke effectively. So if they are dropping their weight, dropping their hips, if they are moving their arms in a way that means they are pulling the water to the side instead of pulling it down. So all of these things to think about where they are creating drag in the water and slowing down their progress. That would be a really important one to look at. Rhythmic breathing, as we've said already, so they don't get so tired. They've got some control over their breathing. They understand about breathing out in the water, breathing in with their mouth out of the water, and they can perform that repetition with confidence and without getting absolutely exhausted. And we'll look into this in more detail later in the presentation, but that every part of a stroke can be adapted for your particular child. So even children with disabilities can absolutely perform a stroke effectively. They just may need certain adaptations, and we will look at that a little bit later. So some questions that I think are important to ask yourself when teaching strokes is, are we traveling, or are the children remaining stationary in the water and not making much progress in moving forward? Because if they're not moving forward with efficiency, then something is wrong with the stroke, probably drag. So having a look at that. Are the children able to look after themselves when they get tired? So what do they do if they are, say they're halfway through their 25-meter distance on the breaststroke and they start to get tired? What could we do? We could flip around onto our back. We could float on our back for a few seconds and take some deep breaths and then move forward with the rest of the stroke. So are they aware of techniques like that to keep them safe and make sure they're not getting completely exhausted? And if the children are running out of breath, if so, why? What's going on there? Pay really close attention to children's breathing. I think that is such a huge part of learning to swim. If their breathing is too fast, if they're holding their breath too long, something's going wrong there and they're getting very tired. So that's another really important question to ask yourself, and will help you to teach a range of strokes, and the children can perform effectively. And then the next part of the national curriculum that I think probably raises the most questions for most people is, how do we perform safe self-rescue? You know, what does that even mean? And what are different water-based situations? So safe self-rescue, that's very hard to say, safe self-rescue. I think that is one to think about of a worst case scenario perspective. So thinking about, right, if this child fell into a river or the sea or a lake or the pool, and they were in their depth or out of their depth, is there a solid side they can climb out of? Is there a floating object they can grip onto? You know, would they know what to do in those situations, and would they be able to perform those physical movements to get themselves out of that water and to get themselves to a place of safety, whatever that place of safety looks like? So those two really link: safe self-rescue and then the different types of water-based situations. So I found in my own swimming teaching, it's been really important to teach children to climb onto a floating object. So for example, you could bring in a surfboard or a large float and get the children to practice this in their depth and out of their depth, because they're going to need slightly different physical movements to get out of the water and onto that floating object. But it's building that confidence as well of, right, there's a floating object, I'm out of my depth, but I know how to get to it and how to pull myself out onto it. So that's an example of something you could use in your teaching. And then also ensuring, and this sounds very basic, but it's so important, can children climb out of the pool? So if they get to the side of the pool, are they able to put their hands on the side and pull themselves out? And that is a really, really important basic of safe self-rescue. I still can't say that. I won't be able to say that whole presentation. Safe self-rescue. And that skill, you know, that needs to be taught at all ages. You know, I've even taught that with babies, with children, children who are not yet fully walking, is being able to grip onto the side of the swimming pool. It is so important that they can find that side, they can grip onto it, and then for slightly older children, they can actually pull themselves out. Safe self-rescue, also thinking about, right, if the worst happens, they've fallen off a boat, they're in the middle of a lake, there's nothing to grip onto, the sides are too far away, do they know what to do to float effectively? So teaching flotation is an enormously important part of safe self-rescue and swimming generally, because developing those flotation skills is going to then feed into effective stroke technique, being able to swim for longer without putting your feet down, because they've got that understanding of making their bodies float and that body position in the water. So teaching floating on their backs in particular is a really important part of safe self-rescue, and it just means in whatever situation they know to float on their back, to be as still as they can. Teaching treading water as well, of course, is really, really important, so that they can maintain a position. So there's lots of different aspects to safe self-rescue, but it's not as alarming and scary as when you first read it and think, what on earth does that mean? Another thing that's really important when you're thinking about different water-based situations is that education for children of how to be safe around water that they will encounter outside of your pool environment. So thinking about children going to the beach, children playing near rivers, ponds, ice, all of those different types of water that they may come across. Do they know how to treat that water with respect? Do they know what they should and shouldn't do? All of that can be either fed into your swimming lessons through, you know, delivering the information, asking questions and about that, but it could also be a classroom-based lesson to add into your PE curriculum, as, you know, have we gone over water safety? And it's a very hot topic at the moment, particularly with lots of things in the news about you know, children unfortunately encountering ice or encountering open water and things going extremely badly. So that education is becoming more and more important, I feel. So here at Twinkl Swim, we have done some things to try to address this side of the curriculum. We've got collections of water safety technique posters that include things like how to teach treading water, how to teach climbing out of a pool, how to teach climbing onto a floating object. We've gathered all of those together for you, and I've got the links for you there. And we also have water safety lessons that can be delivered within the classroom. So I've got an example there from the beginners stage of that water safety lesson pack, and that covers everything that you would need to teach the water safety for that stage. Okay, so something else that is probably a little bit overwhelming to think about when you look at the national curriculum expectations and then the reality of your swimming lessons with your children is, how do we progress? Where do we start? Where do we need to get them to? It's a very fuzzy idea of where to get them to, of, oh, can they you know, can they cross 25 meters? Can they demonstrate a range of strokes? It's not particularly exact what they're asking for in the national curriculum. So progressing is quite tricky to get your head around. So I've tried to break it down here into the different parts of swimming, and so the different areas that should be focused on within your swimming lessons. So of course, number one, absolutely paramount, that we've already talked about, is water safety. The next one, aquatic principles. So this involves the actual teaching of what goes on when we swim, what makes effective swimming and ineffective swimming. So teaching the children what streamlining is, what drag is, what traveling means, you know, teaching them about depth and the names of different strokes. So this is sort of the theory behind the swimming, really, the aquatic principles. Stroke development, of course, is going to be a really important one, and going back to that idea of breaking down the strokes and building them up. Breathing is its whole section on its own, and I'm sure you'll find, that's certainly been my experience of when I've taught groups of children, the breathing techniques tend to be the last thing that slots into place. That takes a lot of practice. Flotation, again, as we've already discussed, is super important for water safety, and there's a big link there, but we'll also teach children to hold that position in the water. Rotation, now this one it's often neglected, but it is so important. So these are skills such as being able to turn in the water when they're out of depth. So can they flip from their back to their front whilst they're swimming? Can they turn in a circle in the water when they're treading water? So those skills, it just builds water confidence and builds that coordination that they will need for being proficient in swimming. Now, water confidence, I put that in its own category because, again, I think that is super important. And there are lots and lots of things that we can do with children who are anxious about water, have very low water confidence. And if they've got low water confidence, you'll find those particular children tend to be the ones that absolutely do not want to put their face in. They really don't want to go under. They really don't want to go out of their depth. And all of those fears can greatly hold them back with progressing with their swimming. So water confidence should be a whole category on its own, I think. And a very important consideration when you're planning your own swimming lessons is, do I have some activities in there that might build confidence in the water? So those could be things as simple as little games that you have at the end. So games that are accessible for everyone, games that are done in the shallow end, for example, and or games that are easy to adapt with flotation, things like that. Or it could even be as simple as getting children to splash their water with faces. Let's pretend to wash our face. Let's pretend to wash our hair. So getting them used to that feeling of water on their face and head to improve that ability to gradually, hopefully, put their head into the water. But it is a very important factor in progressing in swimming. And then finally, at the end, is vocabulary. So thinking about the vocabulary they would need to fully understand the theory behind swimming and what's going on in swimming and the different terms of different movements. You might have things like a star float or a sitting dive. So the vocabulary associated with that. So here at Twinkl Swim, we've done a huge amount of work on developing a progression map. We're extremely proud of this. So our progression map covers all of those different categories, and it covers them from non-swimmers all the way up to proficient. And I've put the link in there to that. It also has a handy guide page at the start to tell you the best way to use it. When we think about progress in swimming, this is the other place where it can be a stumbling block for teachers coming in, especially if you've not taught swimming before, is that you may be faced with a group of, say, year 3 children in your swimming class, but they will have completely different levels of swimming ability. That swimming ability is so dependent on practice and exposure that they get outside of school. And you will inevitably get some children who've been in the pool their entire lives and some children who may possibly be getting in the pool for the first time. And so it's very difficult to group a swimming level by year group or by age. And instead, we really must do it by ability, because there's no, it's not possible that every child in that year 3 group is going to have the same level in swimming. It's just not the same as other subjects. So for that reason, the way we've tackled this progression map is putting it in stages instead. So we've got the non-swimmer stage, which is, you know, the absolute very first time getting in the pool, lots of water confidence stuff involved in there, lots of safety. The beginners unit, improvers, and then competent. So that's our stage 4 is competent, which would reach them to the end of key stage 2. And then we've also got on the progression map the proficient stage. So if you have children that are very confident and doing very well, you could move them on to stage 5. And the beginners stage 2 unit is fully on site now as well. So you could have a look at that on the Twinkl Swim section if you wanted to. And I've just popped the link to the Twinkl Swim progression map there. So, but how do we assess progression? And this is another thing that is quite difficult, I think, when you're faced with a group of children in the pool is, yeah, how on earth do I assess where they're at? So this is something else we've introduced in Twinkl Swim, are some assessments that link to our progression map. So everything on that progression map for stage 2 beginners, for example, links to the different lessons that are in the unit, and then those link to these individual unit assessment grids. So even if you don't use Twinkl Swim, that is certainly something I would advise that you do, is have some means at the poolside of making some notes per child. So whatever aims you have for the swimming, like perhaps your aim is that they can collect a sunken object from the bottom of the pool, that you've got that written down somewhere with their names, and you can tick off whether they've done it or not. And then hopefully at the end of your term, the end of your time in the pool, you can put it all together and have some kind of idea of how all of your children are progressing. But just like everything else, we are going to need to assess progression and show that. So at Twinkl Swim, we've got these assessment grids, and we've got each one tailored for each lesson. And then we also have a digital tracker, which is, again, linked to the progression map. And you can pop in there, pop the kids' names in, and it will be very easy to tick those boxes off on the digital tracker. And it also has percentages there, so you can see to what percentage they are achieving well, and divided into the different categories of water safety, aquatic principles, and stroke development. So hopefully we'll give you a really good idea as their swimming teacher of what they need to work on, where they need to get to, and also something useful to pass on to their next year group teacher the next time that they go swimming. And I've popped the link there to the beginners swimmers assessment pack. Okay, so this is something I've had a lot of questions about in the past, is how to support learners with additional needs. And of course, there's a huge variety there of different needs that could present difficulties when learning how to swim. And you will know your children best. You'll know them, and you'll know their needs and what works for them in the classroom. But often that can be difficult to translate to a poolside environment, which of course is extremely different. These are just some recommendations I've given for really thinking about if you've got children with additional needs. And a major one are the pool dimensions and the features. So if you've got children that have physical disabilities, for example, what is the access like to the pool? Of course, that's going to be a big one. Can they get in or out? Will they be able to get in or out on their own? Because that is going to be a huge safety consideration. And if they cannot get in or out on their own, they really are going to need somebody in the water with them. Also thinking about the swimming pool changing rooms, so the distance from the change rooms to the pool, is that going to present a problem for anybody? Is the pool extremely echoey? Lots of them are, and I have taught several children in the past that have really struggled with sound and that sensory overload from an awful lot of sound. And swimming pools, I'm sure, as you've all experienced, can become very, very noisy, especially when you have dozens and dozens of children having a great time in the water. It gets extremely noisy extremely quickly. So pools that are very echoey, we might need to take that into consideration for children that have those sensory needs. So equipment, what equipment do you have access to? I mean, this is going to be very key for all of your students with the swimming. Do you have flotation equipment available? Do you have other props that you can use? Because that will very much change the nature of the swimming that you do, especially depth. And actually, that probably should be one of the first questions you're asking when you are given a group of children to teach swimming is, do I have access to any flotation? So things like armbands or swimming discs. I actually have some swimming discs right next to me. So these little things that slot over your hands and up to your arms, but they're nice and flexible. Or perhaps swimming noodles like this one, which you can cut in half or use long ones. But those, or armbands, or something that can support children as soon as they get out of their depth, and they're probably going to be essential for any children with additional physical needs. I've also used them quite extensively with children with sensory needs, so children that struggle with the feeling of water going into their ears or nose or face. We have used the flotation devices to adapt the swimming teaching so that we can put a noodle, for example, just around the back of their head to keep their head fully out of water, or perhaps some kind of extra flotation aids just to give them that extra buoyancy in the water, so they're not experiencing those feelings. And often those children are then able to participate very well. So even though many of the strokes and many of the techniques in swimming involve putting your face in the water, especially maintaining that streamlined position, or inevitably you're going to get splashes on the face, you can certainly perform nearly all swimming without putting your face in. It's not essential. It's not in the national curriculum that children must go underwater, that they must put their face in. So it's being really flexible with that, because I've found in my experience many children have not coped with the swimming for that simple reason, that they find it far too challenging to put their face into the water. So an important one to consider. Staffing, of course, like we've already said, how many staff do you need? If you've got children with additional needs, are they going to need somebody in the water? I personally would always recommend with any group of learners that you have going into the pool that you've got somebody in the water with them and somebody on the pool side, because it covers you for both. You've got somebody with that view of the entire area who's going to be able to spot things from above, and then you've got somebody in the water who can, physically intervene whenever needed, or who has that kind of eye level view of what's going on. I think that is the safest way to conduct your swimming lessons. And that could be some kind of ratio you might need to look at with additional learning needs. Just to add to that, which I probably should have mentioned earlier when talking about the pool safety operating procedures, but there is no law, no legal requirement around having a lifeguard or having a certain number of people per children in the pool. It is very much left up to your own discretion, and a great deal of that has to do with the difference that you find in pools, that you may get a very small pool that perhaps one lifeguard would be sufficient. You may get a very large leisure centre pool that needs 4 or 5 lifeguards to have a good view. And so that has been very much left open to the different pools themselves. But of course, I would always say more is better. So I'm sure everyone else would agree, but it's just something to think about. There is no legal requirement, but it is what you feel would be safest for your children. When I have taught lessons with my own swimming school, I've had a qualified lifeguard on the side. I've had myself in the water. I'm not actually a qualified lifeguard. I do have pediatric first aid and of course my swimming teacher certificate, but I would be in the water, and then I would also be in the water with an assistant, and that would be with 7 children in a group. So I would have 2 of us in the water and then 1 on the side for 7 children, and one of those people is a qualified lifeguard. So that was the ratio that I used to do, but of course it will be very dependent on you and your pool, and yes, and who you have available. I've popped spacing in there because that's another one that's very easy to do. So children that struggle with noise, struggle with splashing, just really think about the spacing. Can you put them even just a little bit further away from everybody else, so they've got a bit more space around them and they're not going to be affected by children splashing them in the face? So that will help with that, children that have that sensory need as well. Of course, differentiation is, it's paramount, isn't it, in primary school teaching, but you can absolutely apply it to swimming. There are so many different ways that you can differentiate swimming, and that is something that we've tried to make a big effort at Twinkl Swim to include in the swimming lesson plans that we've provided, and also in the we've got these skills technique posters that demonstrate how to teach a particular technique, such as front crawl, for example, and we will have some differentiation on those posters too for children that are finding it too difficult or children that are finding it too easy even. And last but not least, preparation. So this is another big one that seems to really help with children coming into the pool who may have additional needs, is fully preparing them for what's ahead. So talking them through what's going to happen, perhaps even providing little checklists of, we get to the pool and then we're going to do this, and then we're going to do this, and then we're going to get changed, and then we're going to walk in here, so they know exactly what's coming up, exactly what's going to happen in the water, and then exactly what's going to happen afterwards. So fully preparing them in that way. Again, we've tried to address that at Twinkl Swim by creating visual learning sequences, which is these lovely poolside posters you can bring in that actually have images of everything that's going to happen in the lesson, to help children who yes, who may find that useful. So I popped a link in there as well. We've also got a Twinkl Swim SEND swimming activities pack that includes lots and lots of different ideas about how you can be inclusive in swimming and different ways that you can adapt certain activities to address different needs. And this one often gets neglected, but it's the best part about teaching in water, I think, is making it fun, because children absolutely love being in the water and they will have a fantastic time. So some of the ways that we've done it at Twinkl Swim is to give each lesson a little theme. So for example, we've got one lesson where the children are learning to be sea otters, and then tie that into a particular stroke development. There are always ways of practicing the different swimming skills with certain games, and again, we've really tried to do that at Twinkl Swim, either within the lesson plans themselves, or we've got this separate swimming games pack, which is tailored by different skills. And also to celebrate success. That is so important in all subjects. So certificates, maybe even a little graduation ceremony, you know, well done, you've covered everything in stage 2, why not? So we've created a Twinkl Swim certificates pack, and we have also created celebration lessons. So at the end of your swimming unit, that hopefully the last lesson you have in the pool, the lesson at the end of the term, you can do something a little bit more creative and a little less teaching heavy in that lesson. So we've created a celebration lesson where children can consolidate all of their skills, but in a really fun way. So for example, with this one, we're playing water polo. And just a couple of little tips, just generally for teaching swimming. It's got to be function over form. I mean, it's lovely to see an absolutely perfect front crawl with the hand position and the rhythmic breathing, and you know, oh, it's a thing of joy. I love that. Who doesn't? But what's more important is it functional? Is the child able to travel through the water? Are they able to breathe comfortably without getting into a panic, getting really out of breath, getting very tired? Are they as streamlined as they possibly could be? So always thinking function over form. And another one that I've always got is, when in doubt, can they get out? So if you're getting a bit wrapped up in the details of teaching swimming, a major point that is often missed in teaching swimming is it is a life skill, it is a safety skill. We are teaching children to swim because they may be in a situation where it could save their life. So when in doubt, can they get out? If they've fallen into the pool, they've fallen into the sea, they've fallen into the lake, could they get to safety? And if they can't, then let's focus on that. Forget the rest, forget the intricacies of stroke development. Can we get that child into a position where they are able to get to a side and climb out? So just a little bit of the nitty gritty of what we're offering at Twinkl Swim for our lesson packs. So we have completed the beginners unit, and that is online now. So I'll just use that as our example. So every unit, we've got an overview of the whole unit plus our safety guidance pack. We include 10 in the pool swimming lessons. So with the idea that most schools seem to offer a whole term of swimming, so we provided those 10 lessons. But we do bear in mind that some schools offer half-termly swimming. So those 10 lessons have been specifically designed that it would be very easy to condense them into 5. So lessons 1 to 5 cover the absolute core skills of that unit. And then lessons 6 to 10 are further development of those skills. So if you really couldn't get in the pool more than 5 times within that term, then you could use that first half of the lesson pack. So we've really tried to think about that so it's applicable to all schools. As I just said, we've also got a lovely celebration lesson for the end of term, and we've included one classroom-based water safety lesson to really tick off that requirement of covering water safety, covering safe self-rescue, and covering water safety in different forms of water that the children may encounter. Water safety is also embedded in each of the lessons that we have included. So teaching those skills such as climbing onto a floating object, that would be included within the swimming lessons themselves at the pool. We've also put in a lovely certificates pack and the assessment pack, which includes digital and paper versions, so will hopefully suit everybody. And then within the lessons themselves, we've got a comprehensive lesson plan, which is very detailed, has lots of differentiation. So if you have never taught swimming before in your life, you'll be able to pick up that comprehensive lesson plan and just follow it word for word, and you will go into that pool with confidence, I promise you, because we've really tried to think of absolutely everything with those lesson plans. We've even tried to differentiate for pool depth. So whatever pool that you're using, you should be able to apply that lesson, and also for access to equipment. So we've given you different options depending on different access to different equipment. So that comprehensive lesson plan can be your Bible if you've never taught swimming before, or you'd like something with a lot of detail. We've also included a lesson snapshot. So this is for more, perhaps more experienced swimming teachers. It's just giving you a summary of the whole lesson. So that's a 1-page lesson plan, which you could even take to poolside and refer to if you want to. Each lesson plan also contains skills posters. So these are the posters I've mentioned before that have illustrations and explanations of different parts of swimming. So that could be a stroke development, for example, or it could be a particular shape float, it could be a dive. But that skills poster will have a child-facing side with images explaining the technique and some basic child-friendly language. And then on the back of the skills poster, it's got the adult-facing side, which gives you detailed instructions on how to teach it. So those would be super useful to take into the pool with you, especially if it's something you've not taught before, maybe something you don't know how to do yourself, or something you're just completely unfamiliar with. So those are very useful. And then also in every pack are the visual learning sequences. So those are the illustrated lesson plans, which you could bring in and you could show to children as a visual prompt. So other swimming support that we've got at Twinkl Swim, we've got a collection of warm-up cards with some useful warm-up activities, which again are differentiated for any pool depth and access to equipment. And we've also got the same for cooling down, both of which of course are important to all PE lessons and very important to swimming. We've got some parent and child activities coming soon. They should be online very soon, hopefully within the next couple of weeks. So keep an eye out for that. Water anxiety, which I've mentioned before, which can really hold children back and can be very problematic for all concerned. We have developed a Twinkl Swim water confidence pack, and that includes lots of different activities you could try with your children. That's a lovely one because I think it could apply to, you could use that with a class, a group, one-to-one. You know, if you're a parent, that would be an ideal one to use with your child if they're experiencing any water wobbles. So that's a really lovely one. And then one to look at if you need some more detailed descriptions of different strokes are the Twinkl Swim stroke technique cards. So these skills posters that I've mentioned previously. Well, thank you very much. I feel like that was a lot of information in quite a short space of time. But we'll just round up now if anybody's got any questions. And just a little reminder of what the National Curriculum for PE says about swimming and water safety. So pupils should be taught to swim competently, confidently, proficiently over a distance of at least 25 meters, use a range of strokes effectively, and perform safe self-rescue in different water-based situations. And I really hope within this TeachMeet, we've been able to tell you some different ways to do that and dive into each one of those statements in a little bit more depth and hopefully make them seem a little bit more manageable and give you some ideas for your own swimming teaching. But thank you very much for listening.